Welcome to XRP Pro Ledger, and what Brad Garlinghouse said at Consensus Miami this week is going to take a few minutes to fully unpack, because most of the coverage treated it as two separate interview moments when it is actually one coherent institutional deployment picture that changes how you should be thinking about XRP's role in the financial system right now. He said making XRP good collateral across institutional platforms is a big deal, and that the Hidden Road acquisition, now rebranded as Ripple Prime, was built specifically to make that happen across lots of different institutional platforms. Not a payment rail, not a bridge asset, collateral. The same function that US Treasury bonds serve in traditional finance. The asset institutions lock in place to guarantee their obligations. And then in the same interview, Garlinghouse gave the most specific public timeline for the Clarity Act that any Ripple executive has stated on record this year. Markup in either the week of May 11th or May 18th, with a very high likelihood of 60 Senate votes once it clears committee. One sentence told you what XRP is becoming. The other sentence told you when the legal environment enables it at scale. Read together in the same interview on the same day, they are the most important thing Garlinghouse has said publicly in 2026. Let us start by being precise about the difference between a payment rail and collateral, because this distinction is the key that unlocks everything else in this analysis, and it is the distinction that most XRP commentary is not making clearly enough. A payment rail is infrastructure that value moves through. XRP functioning as a payment rail means institutions use it to transfer value from one place to another. Cross-border payments, correspondent banking settlement, remittances. That use case has been Ripple's core institutional deployment story for years, and it is genuinely valuable because it creates transaction demand for XRP every time a payment is processed through it. Collateral is fundamentally different in a way that matters enormously for price dynamics. Collateral is not value in transit. It is value held in place as a guarantee. When a financial institution posts US Treasury bonds as collateral, it is not spending those bonds. It is locking them in a position that says this asset backs my obligation. The institution must hold it. It must not move it. It must maintain it as a reserve position against the obligations it is guaranteeing. That is positional demand, not transactional demand. And positional demand does not flow through and exit. It accumulates and stays. The Hidden Road acquisition and what it means for XRP's collateral function is the strategic context that makes Garlinghouse's statement analytically precise rather than aspirational. Before Ripple acquired it, Hidden Road cleared over $3 trillion annually for more than 300 institutional clients, hedge funds, asset managers, and institutional trading firms that require collateral for their clearing and settlement operations. Ripple acquired that infrastructure, rebranded it as Ripple Prime, and is now operating it with XRP positioned as the collateral asset that institutional clients can use within that clearing framework. And here is the specific detail that elevates this from a corporate acquisition story to a structural market infrastructure story. Ripple Prime is inside the DTCC's NSCC directory, alongside Goldman Sachs and JPMorgan. That means institutional clients using Ripple Prime for clearing are operating within the same infrastructure that clears every American securities transaction. XRP as collateral within that infrastructure is not a theoretical future application. It is an operational deployment inside the foundational settlement layer of the US financial system. That is what Garlinghouse meant when he said lots of different institutional platforms. The DTCC directory is not one platform. It is the platform that every other platform connects to. Now let us decode Garlinghouse's Clarity Act timeline statement with the precision it deserves, because the specific language he used carries institutional weight that casual coverage missed entirely. He said getting Senator Tillis on board and a likely markup for either the week of May 11th or May 18th, and if we get it out of committee, the likelihood of 60 votes on the Senate floor is very high. 3 components, each one matters. Component 1, Senator Tillis on board. Tom Tillis was the primary Republican obstruction to the Clarity Act for weeks. His flip, driven by the stablecoin yield compromise with Senator Angela Alsobrooks, was the breakthrough that reopened the bipartisan path. Garlinghouse named it specifically and called it a big positive shift, the language of someone whose team is in the rooms where these conversations happen, not an outside observer reading press releases. Component 2, markup week of May 11th or May 18th. This is not a vague, optimistic statement from a CEO who has been routinely bullish. This is a specific 2-week window from someone who said explicitly that he has been pretty optimistic throughout, and so far I am feeling more right. He is providing the specific window that his direct information supports. Component 3. Likelihood of 60 votes is very high if it clears committee. The 60 vote threshold deserves its own precise explanation because most retail crypto investors are not familiar with Senate procedural mechanics, and the significance of Garlinghouse's confidence on this specific number gets lost without that context. The 60 vote threshold is the Senate filibuster threshold, the number of votes required to invoke cloture and advance legislation to a final floor vote, despite potential procedural obstruction from the minority. Achieving 60 votes means the bill has genuine bipartisan support deep enough that it cannot be blocked by a partisan minority. Garlinghouse is not saying the bill will pass the floor vote with 60 votes. He is saying that once the bill clears the banking committee markup, the Senate floor vote is not the primary risk point. The committee markup is the gate, and his assessment of that gate from someone with documented access to the rooms where it is being negotiated is that May 11th or May 18th is the likely window, and 60 votes after that is very high. When the most connected CEO in the crypto industry gives you that level of specificity on a legislative timeline, the analytically appropriate response is to take it seriously rather than treat it as routine executive optimism. The Ripple Prime listing inside the DTCC's NSCC directory, alongside Goldman Sachs and JPMorgan, is the institutional infrastructure confirmation that makes the collateral statement operational rather than aspirational, and it connects directly to the DTCC working group announcement that most channels are treating as a sidebar. The DTCC selected 50 institutions to participate in designing the tokenization of $100 trillion in assets, with the working group beginning in July and production rollout starting in October 2026. Ripple Prime is on that list. The institution designing the $100 trillion tokenization infrastructure alongside Goldman Sachs, JPMorgan, Circle, and Fireblocks is not a peripheral participant in the tokenization narrative. It is one of the 50 institutions that the world's most important clearinghouse chose to help architect it. And XRP is the collateral asset that Ripple Prime is bringing to that architecture. The collateral demand that those tokenization deployments will require, institutions locking XRP in place to guarantee clearing obligations across platforms handling trillions in tokenized asset transactions, is the demand that the current price level does not reflect and that the May legislative window is positioned to unlock. The AI strategy that Garlinghouse described at Consensus Miami is the operational signal that tells you more about Ripple's internal confidence level than any press release or earnings call ever could. And it requires reading against the specific context of what Coinbase was doing at the same moment. Brian Armstrong attributed Coinbase's 14% workforce reduction partly to AI enabling smaller teams to ship faster. Garlinghouse's response was direct and pointed. He used the ATM analogy. When automated teller machines were introduced, analysts predicted bank tellers would lose their jobs. But 10 years later, there were twice as many bank tellers because the ATM freed them for more valuable work. He then described companies using AI as a headcount reduction tool as hanging bad management on the AI boogeyman. And then he said the operative words. Ripple's addressable market and growth opportunity are so big that they are not thinking about AI as a headcount reduction tool at all. They are thinking about it as an unlock to go after more products and more customers faster. A company that believes its addressable market is shrinking cuts. A company that believes its addressable market is expanding hires. Ripple is hiring. During a period when Coinbase is cutting and Kraken has delayed its IPO, Ripple's operational posture is the most concrete available signal about what its leadership actually believes the next 12 months hold. The stablecoin dimension of the Clarity Act story that Garlinghouse's Tillis reference points toward is worth examining briefly, because the stablecoin yield compromise that brought Tillis toward alignment reflects a legislative negotiation that resolved one of the primary obstacles the banking lobby had been using to slow the bill. The 105% over-collateralization requirement that the Treasury Department endorsed, requiring stablecoin issuers to maintain the reserve backing in highly liquid US Treasury securities, addressed the banking sector's deposit flight concern at the cost of creating a regulatory standard that favors well-capitalized, institutionally connected stablecoin issuers over less capitalized competitors. Ripple's RLUSD having crossed $1.5 billion in market capitalization and now integrated into OKX's unified order book, is positioned to operate within exactly that regulatory standard. The stablecoin yield compromise that enabled Tillis to move toward the bipartisan path is simultaneously the regulatory framework within which RLUSD has the most structural competitive advantage. The legislative compromise that unlocks the Clarity Act is the same framework that positions RLUSD as the institutionally preferred stablecoin in the post-Clarity Act environment. The collateral and legislative timeline statements read together against a full institutional picture that Consensus Miami assembled produce a specific analytical conclusion that is worth stating clearly. XRP is being positioned simultaneously as institutional collateral through Ripple Prime's clearing infrastructure, as the settlement asset within the DTCC's $100 trillion tokenization working group, and as the underlying asset of RLUSD, the stablecoin whose regulatory positioning benefits directly from the stablecoin yield compromise that resolved the Clarity Act's primary obstruction. The May 11th or May 18th markup window that Garlinghouse described with documented access to the rooms is the legislative event that converts regulatory guidance into permanent federal law across all of those deployment channels simultaneously. The commodity classification under the CFTC that Clarity Act passage provides is not just the removal of SEC overhang. It is the statutory determination that allows every nationally chartered bank, every regulated investment advisor, every insurance company, and every pension fund to treat XRP as a commodity asset for collateral posting, balance sheet treatment, and derivatives market participation without conducting their own independent legal analysis of regulatory risk. The complete picture that Brad Garlinghouse assembled in one Consensus Miami interview, the collateral statement, the Clarity Act timeline with specific weeks and very high probability language, the AI unlock positioning against Coinbase's cuts, and the DTCC working group confirmation is the institutional deployment picture that the current XRP price does not reflect. Collateral demand is positional demand. It does not flow through and exit, it accumulates. The institutions inside Ripple Prime's clearing network that begin using XRP as collateral across platforms will need to maintain those XRP positions for the duration of their clearing obligations. Obligations that compound as the DTCC's tokenization production rollout adds volume to the network starting in October. The May markup window provides the statutory framework that enables deployment at scale. And the CEO who spent $4 billion rebuilding the infrastructure for exactly this moment, who was in the Capitol Hill rooms, and who chose to describe XRP as collateral across lots of different institutional platforms in the same interview where he gave you May 11th or May 18th. That CEO is telling you something specific and verifiable. That word lots is doing more work than the entire sentence around it. If this analysis changed how you're thinking about XRP, hit like and subscribe. I drop deep dive breakdowns like this twice a day to keep you ahead of the market.